Hi, this is JR back again with Dr. Robert, and this time we are going to be talking about, and I can't put a year on this, so maybe we'll talk about that as well, Flutes and Bones, which actually doesn't exist as physical media, which again is a bone that I'm going to have to pick with you about that. We did mention this slightly before. Before I ask you about it though, I've got to say, this is one of my favourites. I love this album. I really love this album. I think it's just beautiful. In your own firmament, how does it sit for you?
In my firmament?
Yeah, I mean, how do you like it compared to your other records, I guess, is what I mean.
It's difficult to say. It's a bit of an outlier.
Yeah.
Because it was the first thing I did after I moved to Spain. So I moved to Spain in 2001 and I started chipping away, but I had so much other stuff going on in my life that it was the first time, I think, ever since I started making records, that I sort of took my foot off the pedal a bit, because I had so much to deal with here. Young kids, building a new life, new country. I was kind of overwhelmed by the experience of moving here and everything, and I didn't want to miss out on that. So I wasn't giving it, I was chipping away, but I wasn't really, the band hadn't reformed yet. I wasn't touring. I was kind of just finding my feet here. But I had started, the first thing I did was Still the Silver.
Yeah.
Which was the first track. So I'd started that guitar loop, and I had this line. I toured once a solo tour of the Scottish Highlands with a guy called Jeep Solid. And Jeep Solid was in a band called White Lightning, who was signed to Apple.
Right.
And they never made a record for Apple because they disappeared into the Netherlands of sort of Portobello Road drug scene with people like the Pink Fairies and all that. But Jeep Solid, real name Roderick Mackenzie, became a good friend, and we toured. He'd moved back to the Highlands. He claimed he was the illegitimate son of Bill Gates. He'd taken quite a lot of acid in his life, but he'd come out the other end. So he called himself a time traveller. So I toured with him in the Highlands, and he was fantastic. And he left me a message on my answer phone just before we left England. And I think he was talking about friendship, and he said, "Now that you've let me into the church, I want Still the Silver."
Right.
And I thought, oh, thanks, Jeep, I'll have that. So that became the first song. And I just chipped away. I had a very primitive old computer in my bedroom in the house that we were renting in a village here. And I just started working on it. But it took, basically, I just chipped away at it over a few years,
Oh, yeah. Well, this is kind of what I was going to ask. This is not a record where you sat down and sort of made a record in a fortnight or whatever, like you have with lots of the other ones that we've talked about. This is a case of, okay, you lay down a drum track now and maybe put the guitar on some other time. And it's sort of a gradual process over the course of, well, as you say, years.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably finished it around about 2004, 2005. But, and I think I can't remember if I put it online somewhere, what I did with it. I don't remember.
Well, according to what I can find out, it didn't actually appear online until 2012. I might be wrong about that. It might have come out before, but most of the sources I can find have got it down for about April 2012 as to when it appeared online. So it may be that you did put it online before, but at some point you've maybe put out an updated version of the files or something.
I think I might have put an early version on Bandcamp, because I opened up a Bandcamp, and I think
I've got Bandcamp open in front of me now, and that says April 2012. But it does say elsewhere online your 2004 album Flutes and Bones. So presumably
it was definitely. I mean, it was earlier than that. But by the time I sort of put it all together and put it on Spotify, it was 2012 by then. But I think I had started putting things out, and I might have had it on before then. But yeah, it was a slow burn of an album because there was so much I was going through. There was so much And that, like I said, that was the first time. I mean, the next thing that I did after that was the P.P. Arnold album.
Yeah.
So that would have been 2007 that we recorded that. So, and I definitely did it before then. So, So it was around, and, it was, there were a lot of things going on. Like I said, we moved out here. Michelle's mother, who was also a very good friend of mine, an artist called Zelda Nolter, she came with us. She died, and so there was, we were going through all that, and there was an awful lot of change going on. For just the kids being full time, and it's like you're a full-time taxi driver at that stage in a new country. Blah blah blah. What we're doing here, how we're going to survive, all that stuff, what we're going to do. So it was an edgy time, but I think that's why the album's got a certain kind of depth to it, because I kind of took my time on it,
On that subject, on the subject of taking your time, because if this album was recorded across like 3 years or something, you'd be forgiven for coming up with a record that sounds quite incoherent, is probably not the right word, but you know what I mean? That doesn't have a sort of theme or a sound or a tone. Yeah. And yet this really does have a sort of tone to it and a sound to it. It sounds like a really honed, it doesn't sound like an expensive piece of work. It sounds like a piece of work that you sort of home recorded, I guess. But having said that, the mixing on it and the production on is superlative. Some of the production on this just sounds gorgeous. So crisp and tight. Things like Such a Small Thing and Steal the Silver and Sleep Song just sound absolutely amazing. But all the songs sound of a piece with each other. It sounds like you were doing a thing. And I guess I want to dig in a little bit into what that thing is. But before I do dig into what that thing is, did you have it in your mind that this was going to be a certain kind of a record? Or did it just become whatever record it was going to be because that's how you felt while you were making it?
I think we didn't have a studio. I remember it was a local drummer, a Spanish guy. We put him in the garage. I was working with Sasha Pankin at the time, was helping me out. And we recorded the drums in a garage somewhere, and then I took the files away and added them. And then I got my guitar, and I liked the rough sound of it, but at the same time I wanted clarity, so it's quite sparse. And I was playing a piece on it. So in the end, it hasn't got much on it, which is why it sounds crisp, And because the technology that we were using, I had a very old computer and a very early version of Logic or something I didn't really know how to use. I wasn't doing anything flash on it. So, and I think the songs were written within a period of probably 18 months, but I took 2 or 3 years to get to record them all. And then once I started with, I think, first of all, it was Steal the Silver, and then it would have been What It Takes and Such a Small Thing, that I knew that I had a sound going then, and there was a sort of direction on it. So, it was, I was aware of that.
What it feels like to me, and I'll dig into, because I think there's also, I don't know whether you could call it an influence, but I'll dig into what I think the influence might be afterwards. But what it sounds like to me is, as a musician, what you're doing is you're putting down something really simple but smart. And then because it's sort of got this sort of simple, like, chord structure or rhythm, like a lot of them have got like a really sort of not straightforward rhythm, but it's a rhythm that just keeps going through the song, which allows you to sort of layer things on over the top. Not a huge amount, but some of the songs, you'll just sort of have this sort of rhythm guitar going with a really sort of spiky, really sort of idiosyncratic rhythm. And then over the top, there'll be some lovely little acoustic guitar flourishes going or something like that.
That's because you just use what's lying about. I had a very crappy little drum machine. I had a very old Yamaha acoustic guitar with rusted strings.
Wow.
That I like the sound of. I've got a bass that I've still got, an old Fender Coronado that was so out of shape that I could only really use one string on it. You know, those things become the parameters and the you know, and it dictates how the album sounds, and and that's good. I like that, you know, because it gives it, you know, gives it identity, and it makes it easier instead of having this vast palette of sounds and things that you can draw on, you know, which is fun as well. I've done all that, but I like those kind of things, you know, the is an album like that, or things like that, where you're just, you know, you're defined by stuff that confines you, you know, musically. And I think it brings out something else. I think it brings out a unity, you know.
Well, I think doing it that way kind of allows for your personality to sort of come out, because sometimes I think when you write more complex music, I think sometimes you subsume yourself to the song. Whereas if you write a more simple song, sometimes your personality is really dominant over the top of the song. I don't know, it just feels like you're really...
Yeah, I mean, Michelle says that. She says, I'm very good at genre, which means that I can write in any genre. I can make something sound, you know, and that's probably true. But she's always like, but where are you in it? And so you strip it away, and you stand alone and you impose your own personality on it. Then it becomes something unique, better or worse, I don't know, but then at least it's me. You know, I mean, because when I was younger, you know, I could do that. I could say, I would hear something and I think, I can write like that, I can do that. And then I could do it, you know. And then I think, well, why? What's the point? You know, be brave, just strip it all apart, go back to that original idea and just put your voice on it and let it be, you know.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you can hear that with the demos you've put out recently on the Patreon. You can hear songs as they were before you gave them a genre, almost sometimes. There's a couple of demos from If Not Now When, for example. Yeah. And If Not Now When ended up sort of a glam rock album. But a couple of the demos don't sound quite so much, It's
probably to do with my drum programming and stuff. It's very basic, but it probably works, you know, it's a bit more spiky, a bit more idiosyncratic, you know.
Yeah, there's a couple of songs on here where you don't, because with you, I always associate you with, and we've talked about this before, a particular rhythm or a particular sort of sensibility about the rhythm. And there's a couple of tracks on here where you've put drum tracks down that don't really have that rhythm at all. And it feels like there's a tension going between the drum track and you playing over the top, where you're trying not to play your natural rhythm over the top of the drum track. But it sounds like you're really enjoying the experience of trying to play a different rhythm to the one that you normally would. Do you know what I mean? And do you think that's true?
I'd have to have a think about that. I don't know which songs you mean, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, well, I think The Killing Breeze is perhaps one, and maybe, I'm trying to think what else, but Place in the Sun or Lay of the Land? I'm trying to think. Yeah, those ones around the middle of the album.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Place in the Sun, I was listening to Everly Brothers, I think. I mean, you know. Also, I like playing with those kind of classic chord structures, just C, A minor, F, G, you know. I know it's been a well-trodden path, but there's something beautiful about it, you know. If you can get away with it, if you can cast a spell within it without it sounding like a million other songs. So, I mean, it's something I'm doing a lot recently. I'm working on a new Blow Monkeys album. That's one of the things I've sort of kept myself to. Don't try and be too clever with chord changes and all that. Just try and hit the emotional heart of the song early on. So, well,
there's a time and a place for anything and everything, but as long as
you know, often these records are often in response to the very thing that I would have done previously. You know, that's what I'm doing now. You know, Journey to You was a big orchestral soul kind of thing. So let's get further away from that as possible. So that, I think, but this album, Flutes and Bones is a quote from a Garcia Lorca poem about bullfighting. Because 5 in the Afternoon which was the album I did the PPR on. 5 in the Afternoon is the classic time when they have the bullfight here. And the bullfight actually represented Spain. It represented Castilian macho kind of culture, which he was against. And he had a particular poem about this. and the death of a bullfighter, and flutes and bones ringing in his ears as he was dying. And I just love the imagery of this. So, but obviously I didn't want to do anything that says, hey, I live in Spain, listen to this flamenco guitar and all that. Otherwise you end up like Sting or something,
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's sort of pop tourism, and I didn't want to do that. But there is a feeling and a flavour to it that I wouldn't have been, that's come out of my experience of moving here. It's
a very sunny album, I think.
Yeah, sunny, but it's sad. I mean, what it takes is specifically about Zelda. Specifically about, she had this thing, right, well, let's have a little bit of what it takes for it, which would mean we'd get a little glass of wine, and then I'd listen to her talking because she was fantastic. And so a real friendship there. But that was my kid's grandmother too, who had moved to Spain with us, and so it was bittersweet because she had died, and we were all in a kind of shock. But at the same time, she lived a beautiful life and was a great friend. So it's very hard to write songs without being about stuff like that and do them justice,
Yeah.
But I
felt you don't want it to be just maudlin.
Well, not just maudlin.
But you don't want it, yeah.
Trite.
Yeah.
I wanted it, so I felt that that'd work, that one. Because it was kind of low key, but the words were right and the feeling was right.
Well, and then we'll go back to the words maybe in a minute, but also this ends with Flutes and Bones, the title track, is like a little instrumental thing at the end.
Yeah.
Which is not, I don't think that's something you'd necessarily done before, just to sort of throw in a little instrumental at the end as a kind of, feels like the sort of chill out, come down song at the end almost.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those open tuned guitar.
Yeah.
Sort of freakouts. I wish I love open G, capo on the fourth fret, and off you go. Ding, 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 and you get this kind of, you get all the overtones and the drone, and I mean, I was starting to play a lot here in the bars at this point because they found out that I was a musician. They didn't know anything about my history, but they knew I was a musician. So there would be a guy that would come. They do now because they've all looked up on the internet, and all of a sudden we were quite big, so it's very different. But back then it wasn't. And there was a guy, Paco, that would play, not flamenco, he'd play Andalusian folk songs, very, very beautiful songs about Maria la Portuguesa and songs like this. And they'd chuck me the guitar, and they say play blues. They wanted blues. They wanted Chuck Berry or Muddy Waters.
Right.
But we'd all be sitting around in a cortico, which is like a country house, just a very simple brick building, and we'd all eat together and drink their local wine. This is what I love about this part of the world, because it's got a kind of North African vibe.
Yeah.
And I mean that they all eat from one big bowl. You have a piece of bread in one hand and a fork in the other, and you eat, and then they finish it and they say, okay, this one washes up, this one, Roberto, you pick the guitar up. Okay, it was a function. It wasn't like, oh, you're somehow any different to anyone. This is what your job is. So my function as a musician in this community felt very different to what it was in England, where the last place I lived in, the home counties, they were very snotty about you being a musician. They sort of turned away and they'd heard me on the radio and thought I was a communist. So I mean, that kind of snooty home counties Tory thing, I was so fucking glad to get away from. And then to come to a place like this where they treated you musicians with respect, but not in any kind of special way. But, that's a job, and we respect that. So you play, please. Here's a guitar. So that never happened to me before, because, it's always been, you don't do that in England, because everyone's like competitive in the pop world, or the musicians. We kind of hide from each other, and it's very rare to make those kind of connections.
When you were doing this sort of thing, then would you play your songs? Would you play cover versions of songs that you knew, or would you learn some of their songs as well?
All of those. I mean, I didn't play much of my songs. I would play a lot of. I would jam a lot. I would just play blues like a sort of a Lightning Hopkins stroke Muddy Waters thing, which I love blues, as you know. So I could play a bit of slide blues for like 20 minutes, one song, and they would, and someone would pick up a tambourine or a bongo, and they'd try and play along, and then Packer would play something, and I would look at him and think, oh, because they're although he's not flamenco, everything's in B flat and everything is odd and in a funny key and the timing's odd and the fingers are doing this and it's all a very different thing. And I'm just looking at it, trying to play along a little bit, and it's fun. It's great fun, So it was a really lovely, eye-opening, immersive experience as a musician, just to be doing that purely for its own sake.
And do you think that comes out in Flutes and Bones then? Because, I mean, it must, right? And I think it probably does, but obviously I wasn't...
I think there's a feeling in there, a different feeling. Not saying it's complacent or relaxed.
Oh, no, I don't think it is
but
at all.
I think there is a sunshine to it, yeah. There's a kind of... a slight feeling of... rebirth, if you like, or regeneration of an energy, that was, which got bigger as I went on, as I lived here, and been quite prolific since then. But that first step was an important one.
It is, in fact, if you think of it, it is a big pivot in your career altogether. I'm not talking about physically because I've not done the maths, but it's basically the middle point of your career, isn't it? All the things you did before were basically in England, and all the things you've done afterwards, you've recorded in places like Wales or whatever afterwards, but, everything that you did before was when you were living in England. Everything you've done since is when you were living in Spain. And this album marks you having finished that first phase and moving into the second phase. So it is kind of a pivot point.
Yeah, a massive pivot. I did record something when I was in Australia, but that never came out, thank God.
I've looked for that. I've been looking for that.
But I think, it's definitely, that's the biggest change, the most important change for me was moving here and doing that. And it took a few years for me to sort of get the momentum going again, and by the time I got the band back together, I was fully committed again to sort of like getting right back into it and writing and doing as much as I could. Mm-hmm. But I needed that. I definitely, as a human being, and my family had to come first, and then we had to make that change for our kids, for me and Michelle. So a lot of things changed for me. Yeah.
So I said a little while ago I was going to talk about what I sort of thought of as the influences on this. And I don't mean a specific sort of, this sounds like X or this sounds like Y. But when I listen to this, one of the things that it really makes me think about is, and you mentioned sort of the guitar loops on Steal the Silver. It feels to me like you've taken your sort of the two extremes of what you've done. One is the sort of really sort of folky stuff, where it's really sort of light and acoustic and that kind of thing. Yeah. And the other is the very opposite extreme, when you were doing like house music at the end of the 80s, where it's all about rhythms and programming and sort of setting up loops that you play around with the loops. Yeah. And this album sounds like folk music done in the style of house music. In other words, it sounds like folk music, but kind of looped folk music. And it's not all the way through, clearly, but I think that's kind of a sort of bedrock under the album, is it's got this kind of electronic influenced acousticness about it. It's like two really extremely different things meeting somewhere in the middle. And the way that you've married them up, I said at the start, I love this record. I think this is a really gorgeous album. I think it's because of that weird marriage.
I think this is Michelle's favourite one that I've done of solo records.
Right.
Yeah, okay, but that, you got to remember that I was trying to do that with Stardews, a kind of electro folk thing, and that's where I was kind of headed with that before Benny sort of suddenly took off and went back to New Zealand for family reasons. So it was already in, you know, I remember bands like Ultramarine and bands like that in the early 90s. And, you know, that kind of thing where, you know, if you took the electro thing away from Steal the Silver, it sounds like Nick Drake.
Yeah.
You know, a Nick Drake riff, kind of, although I can't play as well as he could. But, you know, that kind of thing. And so...
Simon and Garfunkel.
You got to remember that there's always a bit of Tyrannosaurus Rex in my kind of mix.
Yeah.
Or Incredible String Band or things like that. I mean, you know, if you think of the Flutes and Bones, the instrumental song, that could have come off Beard of Stars or Unicorn. You know,
sure,
who know those records will get that.
Do you know the song Angie? And I'm trying to think who did it.
I know it.
Who did it? Do you remember? Paul Simon.
A lot of people did it, but Bertie Anch did it. Davy Graham did it.
Yeah. The one I know, because I'm a big... But there's very much an influence of that kind of sound as well, I think. That kind of guitar playing, that kind of really sort of intricate but acoustic, and it deceives you into thinking it's really simple. But actually there's sort of a lot of picking and rhythm going on at the same time that kind of... It's somewhere in between lead and rhythm guitar, and it's just... If you get it right, and if you can do it right, and it's all over this album, and it's just amazing. And I think it's one of my favourite things, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a lot of people like John Fahey, John Redbourne, you know, Nick Drake, obviously, you know, Bertie Anch, Davy Graham in particular, a guy called Davy Graham. And Angie was one of those things that Paul Simon did. Everybody learned.
Yeah.
And you would start to get into kind of slightly Eastern little licks and picking and things, and just to try and create a spell, you know, a little loop, So there was a lot of that, and because I was writing in this little village, in this little house, in this little village that we've moved into, I was playing quite quietly. I had a Spanish guitar. I was rocking out with a big. I mean, there are some, you know, there was a bit of electric on this album, but there was a lot of the songs were written in my little bedroom on this little Spanish guitar. That's how they would have started. So that feel was there already. And also because I'm in Spain and I'm looking at Paco playing and I'm listening to what's coming out of the radios in the bars, and I'm surrounded by this virtuosity on acoustic guitars, of which I can go nowhere near that, but I have my own version, which is infused with much more kind of blues and, you know, that kind of thing. So that's the bedrock of that kind of sound, I think.
And then the songs themselves, because I mean, I never really dig that far in, because as you've said before, the lyrics that you write, there's kind of an ambiguity and a generalness about them. So, I mean, sometimes they're really specific, but a lot of the time there's kind of you know what they're about, but for anybody else, they can be about something else. And do you know what this album makes me think of when I listen to it most of all is, and I'll give you an example, and this isn't necessarily the specific thought I have, but this sort of, you know, in The Wizard of Oz, you know, that weird scene where they go into the field and the poppies put them to sleep. I think it's poppies.
Yeah.
And as a kid, that freaked me out. The idea that there's a flower, that the smell of it, or whatever it was, the scent of it was so potent, it could put you to sleep and put you into a coma. Yeah. There's something, so there's that sort of thing, a sort of narcotic thing. And when I say a narcotic thing, I don't mean as in, you know, cocaine or marijuana or whatever, but a sort of narcotic feeling about this album. And it's in particular in songs like Sleep Song and maybe Cold Heart, but really it's kind of through a fair bit of the album too, which just has this quality of a kind of, it's sort of like relaxed, but at the same time, not sinister or dangerous, but something a bit mysterious about it. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if that's got something to do with your relocation as well. So there's something about it that's like, I'm in Spain. It's sunny. Everybody's chilled. But at the same time, I'm in a strange country. I'm a stranger in a strange country. You probably haven't learned the language at this point, or you would be learning the language at this point. So I don't know whether there's a quality there where all these good things are balanced with kind of a slight mystery about what's going on around you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that people shouldn't get the wrong idea. It's not, we're up a mountain in Andalusia. The winters are freezing.
Right.
It snows. There's a lot of ghosts here from the Civil War, but also from the time when the Moors were here. There's a lot of. It's all new. It was all new to me then, but I picked up on it. There's a lot of sorrow here. There's a lot of death.
Yeah.
I mean, it's far more in your face than in England. It's Catholicism, to the nth degree,
right.
which I wasn't used to. Although, they pay lip service to it, but it's there. So everywhere you go, there's Christ. And I used to make a joke with them and say, "Who is this guy? I see him everywhere. He never smiles. What's the fuck? Is he suffering for me, not my sins?" As Patti Smith would say. So it's very. It's got a very dark soul as well behind the sunshine. So there were times when I felt very lost and alone, and Sleep Song is basically what it is. Sometimes I felt, what am I doing here? A few years ago I was living in Brixton. That's where I belong. Oh no, I don't belong there anymore because things have changed, and So it wasn't all like, hey, here we are in the sun and the sea. It's not like that at all.
No.
So I tried to reflect those feelings, and I think you're right. It's got a narcotic kind of thing to it, but a lot of it is, unknown. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know people. I didn't know the body language. I didn't know the language. I didn't know the history. I didn't know as much as I do now. And so it was a shock to the system, but I tried to let it flow over me and come out in the songs. Yeah. And also there were moments of euphoria, moments of like, wow, this is what amazing place this is. What an amazing experience we're having. So it was all those things really, and a little bit of Protestant guilt in the end, because I hadn't put a record out for 5 years. Right. And so, which was, well, am I going to,
feeling guilty about that?
I had to make a living again. I wasn't making much in terms of like, at this point, the internet was just starting out, blah, blah, blah. I hadn't really sussed it all out. So it was hairy, and we were living on the edge a bit, but felt really alive, So I think that all those elements are in that. I say that now. At the time, I probably just was processing it like I do. I don't kind of analyze it too much when I'm doing it. But in hindsight, I can see all those things played into it.
Now, on a slightly sort of more prosaic level, something like Such a Small Thing. I mean, several of them are quite production numbers for something that was sort of recorded sort of fairly simply. Yeah. A lot of it does sound like it is something that's quite produced, and Such a Small Thing. You're clearly having a ball with the production on that, because it keeps going into these different sections where you got different things going on with the production.
Oh, that Sasha helped me with that.
Oh, right.
Sasha moved to Spain. My friend Sasha, German guy, and he's a bit more of a wizard on the computer than me. So I would take that in and I'd say, look, I want that to fade in. I want that to sort of do this and all that, and we would work a little bit. I mean, they're basic tricks. But at the time, it works. It works on that one.
It does. It's so much fun. I love that song anyway, but when it sort of goes into the last sort of 2 minutes and it starts doing all these things, I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, and then that's the lead acoustic. It's all acoustic, but most of that. Yeah.
Well, and then I think Sleep Song is extraordinary. That's one of those songs where I just cannot imagine what the process was to write it, because it just, you listen to it afterwards and you think, oh God, the way the drums and the sort of guitars work against each other. It just sounds like every time the snare drum hits, it sort of whacks you up the backside, and you sort of, I don't know, it sounds like the drum is actually having a physical effect on the guitar, if you know what I mean. And I can't, but I mean, how do you go about doing something like that? Do you actually write the drums first and then think, right, let's put some guitar over the top and just feel your way into the rhythm?
That's the other way around. I had acoustic guitar. I had acoustic guitar. And I might have had a drum machine, and then I said to Sasha, listen, we need to get a real drum kit on this. It needs to sound like tough.
Yeah.
So I got a guy, Jose, who came and played on it in Sasha's garage, and we found a couple of loops that were good enough. He wasn't great, but he was all right. So we found a couple of things and we put it together, and then I knew that I needed to put electric guitar on top of it, because it just so happened that I did a one take, sort of like a little bit rough, but it just felt like it was in the pocket with those drums. You know, every little bit just worked together. So you don't fuck with that, you just leave it.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
So it was lucky, but it was built up with acoustic first, then drums, and then electric guitar on top.
See, it sounds the other way around, really, but that's the beauty of it. You can't, I don't think, as a person listening to it, because when you write it and you know what goes into it, you hear what you've put into it. But as a person listening to it from the other end, that record comes on, that song, and you just go, what on earth is happening here? Yeah. Also, across the album, there's a little bit of brass floats in and out every now and again. Who did that? Is that all the same person?
That was a busker, Jose, another Jose that I'd found in Granada. Again, like he came in, I said to him I was making a record, and would you come to my house and my little back room, I've got a little studio. Would you want to come in and have a blast? I think he was totally confused and flummoxed. I said, just play anything that comes into your head. I'll deal with it later. So I played in the whole album in one go. Just left the mic on, and I just picked out a few bits and pieces. And I love it because it's very distinctive. It's almost like a sample from an old jazz record, you know?
Is it trumpets? I couldn't quite work it out.
No, it's saxophone, but it's... Yeah,
saxophone, right.
Yeah.
He plays it very differently, doesn't he? I think he plays it like a trumpet, and maybe that's what... Or maybe not.
Yeah, no, I can see why you would think that. Yeah, it's very different. I mean, he's a Spanish guy that played jazz. He had no idea about playing rock and roll or anything like that, you know, so, which is great.
Yeah.
You know, so that was good fun. And I remember he brought his girlfriend with him who wanted lots of money. I think she clocked that she found out who we were and then thought, oh, there must be lots of money in this. And I said, no, it's not really, I haven't got any money. I can give you a couple of quid and a cup of tea, mate. But, you know, took you off the streets for a while because he was busking in the streets, you know. He's a nice guy.
And it's a lovely little addition to the album. Because when it first comes in, I think Sleep Song, towards the end of Sleep Song is the first... No, actually quite early in Sleep Song is when you first hear it. And actually it's suddenly a sort of big surprise to hear it. And then it kind of becomes this sort of theme through the album every now and again. It just sort of comes in.
It pops up here and there. Well, literally, I played him the album and he just blew on top of the album. All in sequence as it is now. It was the last thing we did.
Nice. Is there any songs on here then that particularly stand out for you? Is there a favourite you have from this album?
Well, you see, some of the songs we redid on Staring at the Sea. Yeah. Because I don't think this had come out by then properly. So it would have been recorded. And I probably thought it was never going to come out.
Yeah.
I might have put singles out or something. I might have put a couple of things out at the time, but I never. So we recorded them, but we never did them as well as this, I don't think. So things like What It Takes and Facing the Rock, they're better versions on this than they are on the Blow Monkeys album, in my opinion. And Facing the Rock was another one that was, I had my school run, taking the kids to school, was down this incredible old road that goes down to the coast, past through this big gorge, and they're taken to the school on the coast. It took me about 45 minutes. It used to take me that long to get around Shepherd's Bush roundabout, as I told people. So and now I was in this amazing place in the school run. So I'd go past this, it was an ancient highway, and that's where that song came from. Again, inspired by Zelda, who was a sculptor.
Right.
A proper artist. It's like someone I'd never met before. And I'd known her many years. I'd known her before I met Michelle, in fact. So another song. So those are What It Takes and Facing the Rock, because they were inspired, if that's the right word, but they're not. That's not really, by Zelda. They're very special to me. I think, I listened to it again today because I knew we were going to do this, and I hadn't listened to it since I put it up online in 2012.
Right.
And I thought, oh yeah, that's good. It is good. It's got something. It sounds, I much prefer these versions to the versions on Staring at the Sea. So Killing Breeze as well, a better version, I think. So
it's really clean.
Still the Silver would be my favourite.
Yeah, sure. Oh, Still the Silver is one of those ones where it comes on and you just think, oh wow, I'm listening to something now, right?
Yeah.
It's terrific.
Yeah.
Right, at the risk of not going so far this time,
good.
But is there anything else that you wanted to talk about on this album that I've not brought up yet? Because I couldn't find an awful lot online about this album, so I couldn't find a lot of pointers for things.
I think we've covered it. I think we've covered it. I mean, I think really what I wanted to say about this was it's a very emotional album for me. It's a very pivotal album. It's really important. And because I'd hit a point where I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to make albums anymore, how I was going to do it, or whether I could write, or whether I wanted to, or what was going on. I had sort of visions of maybe writing books rather than records. I'd started to change. But then once I started recording this, it was the beginning of the second part of my career, in a sense. It started the juices flowing again and getting us and getting everything moving. So it's a really important album for me, and I'm glad you like it, because people whose opinion I value really rate it, and that means a lot to me, even though nobody really knows this record. Nobody really knows it. I mean, it's hidden away on Spotify.
Yeah.
And Bandcamp, and nobody really knows much about it, but that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, well, that's a point. If anybody's listening to this or watching this and hasn't heard this album, hasn't dug it out, don't hold about. Go and find it now.
Cheers.
But on the subject of Staring at the Sea, we've skipped that one. So here we go. Staring at the Sea. We'll do that next time. Because that sounds like it might be a continuation of this conversation anyway.
Yeah.
To a degree, but that'll be an interesting one to talk about.
No problem. As long as it doesn't get libelous.
Of course. Oh, yes, I remember. Yes, we'll get into that. Right, until we do that, thank you, Dr. Robert. It's been terrific.
Thank you. Cheers.